Chairman, we're now live streaming.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, everybody. Sorry we're running a little bit late, but better late than never. I think I'm Councillor Peter Hogarth. I'm chairing the meeting this morning, and I have two colleagues, Councillor Bob Grinsell and Councillor Ken Alsop, who are supporting me today. And I think probably better to go around the table to introduce your good selves. So starting over at, and I will introduce him myself, Andy Cunningham will do the presentation, and Anne Bettison is the licensing officer. And then we've got the back row. Could we have who you are, please?
Dee Darpuri, Licensing Officer, West Midlands Police.
Thank you.
PC Luke Prescott, Licensing Officer, West Midlands Police.
Thank you. Can you press your button?
Liam O'Connor, I'm the licensee of the pub.
Patrick Robson from John Gaunton Partners, solicitor for Liam. Yes.
Santok Gill, Legal Services.
Process this morning is that the licensing officer outlines the application and any objections, and we've all had the report in front of us, and we've had some further details handed round as well. I will then invite the applicant or his representative to address the panel, and the panel may ask questions on all sides. I won't go any further than that because quite a long list of various things. So I think we'll start the process with Andy Cunningham, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I just propose to read out the beginning of the report and then refer you through to the appendices as we go forward. So just at the beginning of the purpose of the report is to consider the review of a premises licence following the summary review application made by West Midlands Police in respect of the Toby Jug public house.
Could you speak into the mic?
Sorry.
That's better.
Yeah, do apologise. Right, okay. For the matters of consideration, the Toby Jug is a public house which has a beer garden and patio area and is located on a busy main road. The premises licence number, which you can see here, I don't intend to read out, was granted by way of a conversion from the Licensing Act 1964 and came into force on the 24th of November 2005. In May 2021, an application was made to transfer the premises licence from Mr. William Blair to the Toby Jug Public House Limited. Mr. Blair remained as a designated premises supervisor. However, day-to-day running of the premises was undertaken by Mr. Blair's stepson, Liam O'Connor. The freehold is owned by EI Group Limited of 3 Monkspath Hall Road, Solihull. A copy of the existing premises licence and licensing summary is at Appendix A. On the 16th of July 2021, West Midlands Police submitted an application for a summary review of the premises licence. The certificate under Section 53A of the Licensing Act 2003 was also submitted along with some suggested interim measures. That application is included in Appendix B. The Licensing Act 2003, Section 53A dictates that once a summary review application is received, the local authority has 48 working hours in which to determine if any interim measures are necessary. A meeting of the Licensing Act subcommittee was held on the 20th of July 2021, and members resolved to implement interim measures pending the full licence review hearing. A copy of this decision is at Appendix C. Mr. O'Connor was informed of this outcome shortly after the meeting on the 20th of July 2021. Upon receipt of the interim steps, an application was received to vary the premises licence to remove Mr. Blair as DPS and designate Mr. O'Connor in this role. Following the consultation period in respect to the review application, representations which are attached to Appendix D were received from the following responsible authorities. That's the Local Safeguarding and Children's Partnership, Environmental Health, Public Health, Licensing and Trading Standards and Environmental Compliance. Additional representations were also received as attached to Appendix E. Additionally, West Midlands Police have submitted some conditions that they would like to see included on the licence. A copy of these are attached at Appendix F. The steps. So overall, once the process has been through, the steps which the Licensing Act Subcommittee may take, if any, are as follows. A, to modify the conditions of the premises licence, including the adding or altering or omitting of any condition. B, exclude a licensable activity from the scope of the licence. C, remove the designated premises supervisor. D, suspend the licence for a period of not exceeding 3 months. Or E, revoke the licence. The decision of the subcommittee must be proportionate and appropriate for the promotion of the 4 licensing objectives, which are the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. If it's all right with you, Chairman, I don't intend to go through the rest of the report, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Panel, have you got any questions to ask the officer at the moment? No, no, right. I'd like to invite the representative for Liam O'Connor to speak, and that's Patrick Robson from John Gaunt Solicitors. Sorry, yeah. Oh, the police first. Doesn't say so here. Right, sorry. But the police first, which will be Luke Prescott, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, councillors. Good morning, everybody. First and foremost, appreciate you arranging this for us to have this expedited review hearing today. We don't take the decision to call for an expedited review within West Midlands Police lightly. This was called after a series of serious incidents of violence, assaults and disorder at premises, which are contained within the packs in front of you. I'll skim through them so that you are aware and that people are aware of exactly why we are here today and what we're trying to address and combat in terms of A, the management of the premises, and B, moving forward to ensure that the calls for service around the levels of disorder and violence are reduced. We have been working with the solicitor, the representative for Liam O'Connor, to try and agree some conditions, which we'll talk about a bit later on. But I think first and foremost, we need to go through some of the incidents. So we haven't delved a great distance back in time. I've only got recent incidents. Due to COVID pandemic, the premises was closed for a period of time, and I think it's fair that we talk about what's been going on very recently. So on the 26th of June at 7 o'clock, we had an ambulance call to the police detailing that a member of the public had been hit with a glass and received an injury that needed treatment. In relation to this, the person told the officers when he was at his home address that he was sat in the Toby Jug, Castle Bromwich, and when an unknown person has thrown a glass towards another person, which has missed that person and hit him, causing an injury to his left eye. Thankfully, the glass did not break, but it bounced off his head and it's caused an injury all the same. We don't know who the person was that threw that glass at the person who received the injury. On the same day at 9:05, so it's the 26th of June 2021, we had a record of contact. That's where somebody calls the police. Unfortunately, we were unable to attend due to service demand and we don't have the resources, but they reported that 50 people were inside the premises. There was no social distancing or bubbles. They were all standing and nobody was wearing masks. I must remind you, this is at a time when COVID cases were creeping up and there was legislation in force where it should be seated only, table service only for drinks, food, etc. Officers did eventually attend. The call came in at 21:05. Officers eventually attended at 22:55, some 1 hour, 50 minutes after the initial call. They attended the pub, conducted a walkthrough with the DPS. It was a busy pub that was quite large, and they said that it can accommodate large numbers between inside and outside. They did say groups were appropriately, at that time, 5 to 11 groups were appropriate sizes and distanced. However, there were a few too many waiting at the front of door for taxis and had been advised. On the 27th of June, the day after at 9:13, we received another call from a different person reporting online that the previous evening there were no guidelines being followed, no masks, and they were serving underage drinkers. Obviously, this is a day after, but they're reporting the same incident and it's somebody else. That went down as an intelligence log, which we recorded against the premises. And then again, on the 27th of June, we had a COVID breach drug intel log where somebody said there was no COVID restrictions being followed and many underage drinkers and drug dealing were in the car park. On the 28th of June, log 3857, timed at 20:42 hours, there was a male walking around with blood on his head. This was outside the premises. I've seen the CCTV body-worn video of the officers that attended. There's a very irate male. He's got serious head injuries. He's bleeding from his head. He's confrontational with the police. And there's another male there that's trying to calm him down. Officers established that he'd been drinking in the Toby jug earlier on and that a fight had broken out and somebody had hit him over the head with a bar stool. I've then viewed the CCTV that the officers have captured from the Toby jug, which does indeed show a fight taking place and that incident happening inside the pub. You can see Liam attending and trying to break up the fight after it had been going on for a couple of minutes. That person, in terms of their injuries were so bad that apparently you could see the skull through the cut in the head. It was quite deep. That was crimed as a Section 18 assault, which is the highest level of assault other than a murder that we can record. On the 8th of July at 00:38 hours, so 20 to 1 in the morning, a member of staff has called saying they've kicked everyone out after the England game and they were hanging around on the car park. They've tried to get people off the car park and told the people on the car park that the police are coming, so they need to clear off now. They've then sped off in their cars, but made threats towards the person that called them that they're going to storm the pub. On the 10th of July at 03:13, log 382 refers to a mother reporting that her daughter had been assaulted. This happened at 11 p.m. on the 9th of July. She's been in hospital as her arm was dislocated, and the offender at the pub was 16 years old. She was at the pub when this happened. They don't know the exact circumstances, but they have had issues with the person in the past assaulting them. This was crimed and is being investigated as we speak. Then on the 11th of July, 12:42, log 1745, as part of our support for licensed premises, we were going round engaging with DPSs, visiting licensed premises, making sure they were in a position to operate safely for members of the public during the England game. We were conscious that it was a big game. We took the time to go into the premises, having parked our police vehicle outside and engage with the DPS. However, when we returned, the tyre had been slashed on the police car on the car park. We were only there a short time, but it's disappointing to say the least. And then we move on to the 11th of July, the same date, at 8:04. A doorman has been knocked out. The pub is over capacity. This is the call for service. The pub is over capacity. The caller is stuck behind the bar. Pub capacity has over 200 people in there. The door staff has just been knocked out. Staff cannot control the amount of people in the pub. This happened in the back garden. Callers advising they have too many people in the pub and they cannot handle it. This was noted by our control room at Silver Control. The door staff member that was knocked out was back on the door and was joined with 2 more security staff. It was deemed a public order situation, and I think over 14 officers and an ambulance attended this location at that time. We established that indeed the doorman had been knocked out momentarily, and what had happened was he was trying to confront an individual within the premises that was either selling alcohol or selling drugs allegedly to a 15-year-old. And when he confronted this individual, a fight broke out. The individual made off before the police officers arrived, obviously. But as you can imagine, it was quite hectic. That prompted a visit from ourselves when we attended on the 14th of July. And I met with Liam, and my first, obviously we'd got the license, we'd got the history, the recent history, and I spoke to Liam, and I asked to speak to the DPS because he wasn't listed as a DPS. Liam had an honest held belief that he was the DPS and went to go and get the license that he'd recently applied for. It was then established that he wasn't the DPS and that the premises has in fact been running without a DPS, in my opinion, for probably the best part of 2 years. His stepfather moved to Spain some time ago, and Liam said he hasn't been back here for over a year. I again advised Liam that he needed to submit the relevant paperwork to change the DPS to himself so that he could effectively manage the pub and run the pub. We had a lengthy conversation there. We were there for some time. I viewed the CCTV with Liam, and disappointingly, on the night of the England match, the internal CCTV cameras showed that there was no control measures at all. I've been in the premises when it's been empty, and there is good signage, there's hand sanitizers, there's one way in, one way out. It's all demonstrated that it could be there, but unfortunately on the night in question, when I viewed the CCTV, I saw that there were 5 members of staff behind the bar. None of them were wearing face masks, and customers were coming in not wearing face masks. There must have been approximately 100 to 150. Liam told me he tried to control them coming in, but ended up getting insulted himself and pushed to the floor. There was just no control measures at all. The staff were continuing to serve alcohol over the bar in a time when it should have been table service only and face masks for people standing. I did explain that this is totally unacceptable and that staff did not comply with the current legislation. And if they didn't comply with the current legislation, how can we expect the customers to behave in a law-abiding manner? Liam said it was just a one-off because the England were playing and it was too busy, and that he tried to allow a guest list in, but people just walked in. I asked to see the incident book, hoping it would have captured some of the incidents that I've highlighted to you today. Liam handed me the incident book, and there was no records of any of the incidents. In fact, there were no records since February 2020. So the record keeping was poor, to say the least, in terms of managing it. I also asked Liam how he effectively banned or barred individuals that were causing him an issue within the premises. Having viewed the CCTV, I know that there are some nominals that are easily identifiable. Liam has also named some, so he knows who he needs to exclude. And there was no documentation in terms of anybody that's ever been barred from the premises. It's a difficult situation, but he and his staff do need to get a grip of the premises and start excluding certain patrons that are making problems and causing his license to come under such scrutiny. The CCTV was so poor. It was grainy. It looked like it was not fit for purpose, in all honesty. I could see what was taking place, but as an evidential, for evidential purposes, it was really poor. So as part of the interim measures that we agreed when we called for this expedited review, we asked that CCTV was installed to a standard approved by West Midlands Police. I can confirm that that has now taken place, and I have visited and viewed it with Liam. Disappointingly, as we walked out of the office on the 14th of July, there was maybe 10 to 20 people participating as patrons within the premises. As I walked out, the member of staff that was on duty was serving a customer at the bar, so it nullifies that allegation or mitigation from Liam that it was just a one-off. It was still table service only, and the staff, they need the training, they need the management, they need the guidance, and they need the discipline, to be honest. There is body-worn footage in relation to some of the incidents which I have shared with the representatives and yourselves. I've described it as best I can to you. We're talking about serious injuries here where people have had broken bones and cuts where you can see their skull. We've already discussed the pub was clearly being run without a current DPS having any interaction overseeing the day-to-day running of it. There are levels of violence and disorder at the location that are causing a drain on the emergency services. At least 14 officers had to attend on the 11th of July together with an ambulance. We've had reports of drug dealing at the location, and the assaults are not minor scuffles. These are assaults where the victims have received substantial injuries requiring hospital treatment. In a time where we should be social distancing, or at that time we should definitely be social distancing, there should actually be a reduction in violent crime at licensed premises, but this premises is showing a significant increase. When the police have visited to offer help and guidance, we've suffered criminal damage to our police vehicle, thus limiting our patrols and costing money to repair. I've already said the premises does have a COVID risk assessment and measures in place, but they're not being adhered to.
Luke, sorry to interrupt. Read
Okay.
out everything there, to be perfectly honest. We have read it all.
Yep.
And we've listened to the real serious situation that,
Yep.
again, which you've highlighted. And I think probably that, unless you want to highlight anything else, I think there's no need to keep being repetitive.
I think we have worked with the solicitor and we have proposed some conditions, which I'll leave the solicitor to talk you through. Unless you've got any questions, I've got nothing further.
Any questions from the panel at this moment in time? I know we want to hear the solicitor as well. So Bob Grinsell will presumably ask a question at the moment.
Well, no, I won't, because I've heard, obviously, from you, PC Prescott. I've read the papers, but in all fairness, I think it best to, and I do have serious questions to ask, but in all fairness, I think it would be, should be done after the licensee and his representative say their piece, and then because they could be questions for both of you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to ask Patrick Robson to.
Chairman.
Your
Licensing.
lights.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, I'm here today representing the Licensing Authority as the responsible authority, and you will see at your papers that I've put in a representation in support of this review. Again, I don't propose to read it out verbatim, but just to pick up on a couple of points. I've had quite a lot of interactions with the premises personally in my capacity as the licensing manager over the last 4 or 5 years. I've spoken to Liam on a number of occasions at the premises. I think probably something that Luke's already picked up on is the fact that Liam has never had any legal responsibility at the premises, and whilst that is perfectly, lawful in the eyes of the Licensing Act, it does bring into question the effectiveness of the management structure in place, and that's always kind of been my concern. He's always been the person that has been left in charge in the premises, but as Luke's already pointed out, there's been issues with recording of incidents, training records, and most specifically from my point of view, on a number of occasions about 3 years ago, each time I visited the premises, there was evidence of smoking taking place in there, presumably by staff members, because it was generally always in the staff area. And it's things like that that make me have concerns around how a premises is being managed. If Liam, being the person in charge, thinks it's acceptable to allow his staff to smoke in the staff area when it's clearly unlawful, then that, like I say, would bring into question it would bring into question the effectiveness of the management at the premises. There was also some issues with noise taking place, albeit the majority of complaints were from the same person. That was addressed but then became a problem again on a number of occasions, and it's always given us cause to go back on numerous occasions and to send letters confirming the issues that we've found and the concerns that we've had. Luke's made reference to a number of conditions, and you've got some of your papers that were proposed by the police. And I know he's been in discussion with Patrick and Liam about those conditions, and Patrick has issued a revised set of conditions, which I've seen as well. I'm happy that they do address my concerns, assuming that they are complied with and taken seriously by Liam and his team. And obviously it will be our job in partnership with the police to go back to the premises and check that is the case. The CCTV condition that's been proposed will address my worries about smoking in the premises and the management of the system. The noise conditions regarding the noise management plan, which I'd suggested, again, appear to cover everything that I think will satisfy me. And there's quite a comprehensive condition been suggested about training and record keeping for members of staff who are working at the premises. And again, I believe that would satisfy my concerns. So if there's anything further I can answer questions about, Chairman, that's my summary of my representation.
Thank you, Ms. Bettison. This is basically to Luke and yourself. The concern, I've seen all the recommendations here, and we'll hear further in a moment of time. But would you think it would be worthwhile, even on a temporary basis, for a period of time, that the late hours are reduced, maybe, to get a bit of normality back into the property and the pub there? Maybe it's something you could consider during the course of what is heard this morning. Okay. So I believe now I've got it in the right order that Patrick Robson from John Gaunt Solicitors on behalf of Liam O'Connor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And good morning, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Make sure you can hear me properly with that. Thank you. Obviously, we're here today because obviously there has been serious concerns raised by a number of authorities. And so I do have a submission to give to you, one that can sort of cover in detail some of them and ones that can sort of be sort of shorter. And I'll try and go through the middle ground and address some of the sort of the more significant concerns that have been raised. There are some sort of more sort of historical things that have been raised as well I might not touch on. If there's anything you feel I have not covered or want to cover more sufficiently, then please do ask and I can do so. Just to start, I just wanted to touch on a little bit about legal framework, which is partially obviously directed to your legal advisor as well. So I'll try and keep this bit particularly short. And that's the test that applies in this matter in terms of what decision you come to. During the interim steps decision made previously, the law says that committee needed to make a decision that was necessary for the promotion of the licensing objectives. And for this committee, it's a decision that is appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives. And there's just one case law I brought your solicitor's attention to from a court of appeal that talks about the principle of proportionality, because you must come to a decision that is appropriate and proportionate. Proportionality, according to this case, means that the prohibition of an economic activity, which is potentially a consideration for you today, is subject to the condition that any prohibitory measures you put forward will be appropriate and necessary. So it will be my submission that a proportionate decision that you will come to must consider both what steps are appropriate and necessary. So even though the law does talk about these two different words, I would suggest this case law means it is effectively the same thing. I'd also note that the interim steps decision that was came to did reference in it that the interim steps taken were, quote, felt it was appropriate and necessary to modify the conditions. So I suggest a consideration of appropriate and necessary was undertaken at the interim steps hearing point as well. Very briefly, there's some important guidance paragraphs, and I won't labour these, but one talks about conditions, and conditions should be proportionate, justifiable, and capable of being met. So that's something I will talk about as we go along with the conditions put forward. Of course, you must make a decision that is evidence-based. You'll be well aware of that. That's guidance paragraph 9.43, and that talks about being a proportionate decision as well. And importantly, guidance paragraph 1120, talking about powers and a review that you would look to identify the causes of the concerns, and remedial action taken should be directed at those causes, and only appropriate proportionate response to address those causes should be sort of really considered. So overall, this hearing today it's not about a punishment of the premises, but it is looking about what has happened. Is there a corrective and remedial measures that can be put forward to address the concerns that have been raised? And I'll say, obviously, the interim steps hearing looked at these matters in brief as well, and I'm not sure the format of the committee, how many members may have been on that interim steps committee. I believe one councillor may have been on that interim steps hearing. But I'll submit the decision today, it would not be a proportionate one, and therefore maybe not appropriate or necessary to suspend or revoke the premises licence, and that instead the imposition of robust conditions would be a more appropriate and proportionate way forward for the promotion of the licensing objectives. Just a little bit of background in terms of the premises and Liam. So Liam has been associated with the premises for some time. So he's lived there, he's worked for his stepdad and his mum who've run the business. He's worked behind the bar there. He's acted kind of as a relief manager from time to time as well. And then he took over the premises himself a little while ago to run it in his own stead. It's a community sort of premises, so it's there to serve the community and be a benefit to them. It previously had a food offering that was wound down during COVID times. That's something he wants to bring up again. He needs some new kitchen equipment to do so, but he's looking to get a more food offering back into the premises as it used to be. When he gets on his feet a bit more financially, sort of post-COVID. He's got a number of staff that he employs, so other than himself, there's about 3 or 4 staff that are sort of dependent on the premises in terms of income. The customer base is generally, there'll be families there, sort of a more older clientele, sort of 40 to 50-year-olds, but sort of all are welcome generally. And I think it's worth stating at this point, with everything that has gone on, the serious things that have gone on in the recent months, Liam is looking to start a pub watch in the local area. And a pub watch is obviously a very powerful tool that can happen in the local area where premises can join together and sort of share information and work with the council, work with the police, and particularly they can instigate pub watch bans. When any sort of troublemaker is banned at one pub can be banned throughout the whole local area. So that's something that should assist. So hopefully with the support of the police and council, that's something he's looking to get underway. There's one premises on board already, and he's in discussions with a couple of other premises in there as well to bring that forward. So I hadn't put a condition to that effect in those conditions in my little bundle, but he would be happy to have something imposed on the licence saying he will be a member of a pub watch scheme if such scheme is in operation. So that would not be a problem whatsoever. He's looking to instigate that scheme himself, and touch wood, that's something he can take forward. Overall, in terms of these incidents and issues that have arisen, just as an overall general point, it is a police-led review. The police trigger the summary review, which leads to this particular hearing here today. So I'm going to spend most of my time just concentrating on those most recent issues that PT Prescott had talked about and those ones flagged. And of course, there's those 11 log entries that you will have seen. It's of course for you to scrutinise and form a view on those, depending on what we will say as well. But I just want to sort of clarify, there's 11 log entries, but that doesn't necessarily equate to 11 incidents, of course. We've got 4 log entries relate to that 26th of June, it would seem to be. 2 of those are non-corroborated caller reports, presumably from sort of locals in the area. And we've got this one purported COVID breach of 50 people gathering, and I'll address that in a bit. So actually over a third of the log entries relate to one date in the calendar. And then there's 4 entries, of course, relate to the England game in the final. So again, another third of those entries relate to that particular date. There are 8 entries over 2 dates. And then if you look at them, the 11 entries therefore equate to sort of 5 dates worth of incidents. And I would not try to downplay the seriousness of the incidents. You've heard from PT Prescott. There are, significant injuries have been caused to members of the public in certain one of these incidents. I just wanted to point out in terms of the volume of incidents, it might not on first glance be as many if it's not been scrutinised properly, because some do duplicate each other in terms of the call logs. Some of those log entries I would submit aren't of a huge concern for yourselves, and I'll mention why I want to get to them, but of course there are certainly incidents in there that are of great concern to you, and obviously my submission will be that they are serious incidents, but the imposition of robust conditions going forward on the licence will be an appropriate way forward to sort of address the worries about potential future issues. In terms of specifics, I'll just touch on noise complaints first, quite briefly. Mostly sort of historic noise complaints raised by your licensing officer, sort of mostly between 2013 and 2017, as I read the paperwork correctly. Just want to emphasise, Liam did sort of take those seriously at the time. He'd had sort of meetings with residents at the premises, on premises, like circulated a letter with his contact details so he could be contacted in the event of any noise complaints. That's something he was conscious of at the time. And I know, and I don't know if there have been more noise complaints more recently, but from the paperwork, it seems that it was more historic issue than anything sort of a more recent nature. But nevertheless, conditions have been put forward to address concerns about the public nuisance licensing objective, and as Anne said, to her satisfaction. So there's conditions about arranging taxis, keeping certain doors closed during entertainment, no outside entertainment, perimeter checks, and staff supervising dispersal at closure times. All those conditions are put forward to address those particular concerns. There has been some sort of references to drugs in the paperwork as well, so I think I ought to really address those because that may be of concern to yourselves sitting on the committee. I would say it is important to note that drugs can often be very much a community problem. It's not usually just at a specific premises that drugs might be a problem. It's usually a problem that exists in a locality. Liam operates a zero tolerance policy. You know, if any time sort of drug taking or drug dealing was witnessed on the premises, of course, that would absolutely be reported. It's never possible to totally eradicate any sort of drugs problem from an area, even the most secure institutions out there. If you think prisons and military institutions, we'll still have sort of drugs in them and drug use. But it's important that drugs do take steps to tackle what might be drug use on a premises and undertake deterrent steps, displaying posters and regular toilet checks and sort of a zero tolerance policy of banning anyone that is found to be in breach of those things, and those things do occur. Clearly, any drug dealing might be of an even greater concern to members in terms of what might be occurring. And of course, if anyone was caught doing that, there would be a permanent ban to them, and that is reflected in condition 18 of the conditions that are put forward. Any sort of culprits will be dealt with very harshly and permanently banned. I would stress that Liam's never witnessed any drug dealing himself on the premises. And of course, there's only sort of one report in the paperwork of purported drug dealing in the car park. I presume that's from a member of the public. That isn't corroborated, so that's not sort of a verified report. Someone obviously thinks they have witnessed something. They may not be able to say definitively what they witnessed. They can sort of speculate what they witnessed. Equally, Liam could not outright, and we cannot outright sit here and say that did not occur as the person, you know, purports it to happen. But if that is something that happens and that is concerns, then that is one of the reasons why actually a robust CCTV condition and CCTV coverage in the car park is there to deter that and address those particular concerns. And obviously there's CCTV now into the car park to sort of, which should be able to capture hopefully sort of registration plates if there's further reports of this nature. And I'll just mention as well, guidance paragraph 2.3 at this stage as well, which deals with conditions again, that should be targeted on deterrence and preventing crime and disorder. And it gives the example that CCTV cameras inside and outside the venue can actively deter disorder, nuisance, antisocial behaviour and crime generally. So the guidance does recognise CCTV is a very powerful tool for tackling sort of allegations of this particular nature. And as I think PC Prescott's mentioned, the CCTV system has been upgraded, I think, to a standard the police will be happy with. And obviously going forward, the condition is that it must be to West Midlands Police satisfaction. So if that position ever changed, they were not satisfied with the camera coverage, they can basically get Liam to sort of upgrade it or change it, you know, as per their requirements. I just wanted to say as well, I've put in this little bundle of documents. I wasn't going to take you through necessarily every single one, but you may have seen there's some CCTV quote details on pages 16 to 19. The important point there was it's not saying about how much it costs. That's not relevant here. The important thing on there was the dates of the quotes were sort of the 1st of July and 5th of July. So the point was the CCTV upgrade was not a knee-jerk reaction to the summary review and you thinking, oh, he's been pushed into this position. He was generally looking to get that upgraded anyway. He was aware that's something that needed to be on with. There was not a condition about CCTV currently on his licence. there will be going forward if you're minded to agree with the conditions put forward. But he was on with that anyway. Obviously, COVID times has been financially difficult for many in the licensed trade, and it is a financial outlay to upgrade it, but that's something he committed to and was on with anyway in trying to get that upgraded. And of course, it is now in a position where it has been upgraded to West Midlands Police satisfaction. I think it's also very important for me to address, well, not potential concerns, but are very much legitimate and actual concerns you will have about COVID breaches that are said to have been stated at the premises. Obviously, we're aware relevant regulations relating to premises have fallen away, but even so, they were in place at the time, and so it's important to address those. I think the one thing we would say, and I will get into, is there is a suggestion there may be sort of ongoing or routine breaches, like a habitual breaches to those laws that are in force prior to this so-called Freedom Day. So I just wanted to touch on those as well. Obviously, there is a significant breach which is in there, but I just wanted to do touch on some of the other ones as well that are put forward. Of course, the documents you have from the police will generally concentrate on adverse contact that may have occurred with the premises and won't reference every time there's been a licensing visit. So I would make the point that actually there was a lot of police contact, you know, when the England games were on, and particularly those knockout stages. I think Liam was saying the police maybe were visiting a couple of times per England game along those ways. So there was contact from the authorities and visits. And obviously, if there were breaches witnessed at that time, you would have expected that to be put before you. So there is compliance there with the sort of the COVID regulations. Otherwise, you know, other ones would have been flagged due from other police or authority visits. This one about the 26th of June, there's 3 reports which would appear all to link to that same day. So 3 of these 11 call logs do link to that one. So it is 50 people, no social distancing or bubbles, all standing. Now that is fairly scant on detail, and I popped the caller log for that on that first page of my bundle. And I know PC Prescott did say the report was inside the premises. That was news to me because I wasn't aware whether the allegation was inside or outside, and the caller log doesn't specify. So I'm actually not sure if the caller was calling through to say there's people outside, because on that day, Liam is aware on that day there were other 2 pubs in the area that closed down earlier than him. And he knew because 10 customers came down from another pub and gained entry. But then after that, 50 more came down wanting to get into the premises. And he did say, that is too many, I'm not going to let you in. So there would have been 50 people outside refused entry that would have been milling around for a little while before they dispersed. So it is a level of speculation I appreciate, but it may be actually those 50 people referenced in these caller logs are to those people outside. And actually, perhaps they weren't socially distancing as they should, but they hadn't gained entry and dispersed on their way. So maybe those other 2 caller reports apply to those as well. So I would say they're not corroborated or verified allegations, and we're not aware that there's any actual breaches in the premises on that particular date. What you do have as evidence before you is that caller log, and I know it is the police attendance at 5 to 11, so a little while after these reports were rung through, but you actually do have sort of good quality evidence from the police themselves that they attended the pub, they conducted a walk through the DPS, and it did say it's a very busy pub, so it was busy at the time. So that's when you might think breaches are more likely to occur. It was busy at the time, but large, you know, can accommodate large numbers inside and outside, but groups were appropriately distanced and appropriately sized. A few too many waiting at the door for taxis, but that was it. So no COVID breaches sort of evidence there, and that log was closed. So on that particular date, not sure exactly what those callers were necessarily referring to. It may have been those 50 people that were refused entry. Of course, however, there is this issue on the England final day with England playing Italy on the Sunday, the 11th of July. And this can be nothing more really, having spoken to Liam about it and everything, a mea culpa by him on that particular day. Alcohol was allowed to be served from the bar on that day. That's undeniable. What happened, it shouldn't have happened. The reason it did happen was, and I would want you to take this absolutely not as an excuse, but an explanation. So this is not an excuse to what the law says, is pub was busy. It's building up to kick-off. Table service was being done at that point in time on the build-up to kick-off. but customers become more agitated. They want to get served. They want to get served quicker. Table service isn't as quick as bar service. So a decision was made. The bar was opened to try and get people their drinks quicker, to maybe sort of nip in the bud any potential agitation. It was intended that would be a temporary thing to address that situation, but it's a breach. A breach is a breach. It shouldn't have happened. It should be table service only. Liam accepts the consequences of that. Obviously, in hindsight, would never let that happen. Maybe it might not have opened that night in hindsight at all. Can offer apologies that it did happen. If you want to hear from him about that particular incident, he can speak a case of bad judgment on that particular night. He fell short of what would have been expected on that occasion, and is apologetic and sorry for that happening. What you may then feel may have compounded issues, as PT Prescott mentioned, is we had the police visit on the Wednesday, just to talk through and view the CCTV and talk about the trouble at the England game, which I will address separately in terms of some of the violent incidents. I think Liam said he was doing table service at the time of that police visit, and when PC Prescott did come out, there was a man at the bar, and he should not have been at the bar because you're not allowed to be served at the bar. But one of the Google reviews you may have seen I've placed in on page 6 of my bundle is actually from that particular customer in question. So you'll see it's the 14th of July. This gentleman called Lee, he was a little bit upset. Haven't been there. Very friendly, but for the manager, I think you need more training. Yes, I was at the bar without a mask, and I shouldn't have been. I only wanted to ask about bar snacks. I feel sorry for the lady behind the bar, and I apologise for my mistake. You seem to treat the lady behind the bar like dirt. I will make an official complaint due to your attitudes towards staff. So that links to that incident, and I think it's accepted if you come out of the office and saw the man at the bar, you would think he is being served, but the bar staff, having spoken to her, she was not intending to serve him, and Liam, thinking that might have been the case, intervened and did give her a little bit of a rollicking just in case that what was happening. But just wanted to give assurances to the committee that on that occasion it's not, again, some habitual sort of ongoing breaches in terms of that date. Fully put his hands up to those breaches on the England game. He does take his responsibility seriously. I don't think I'd say it's been perfect at all times. You know, can't say for a year and a half it's always been perfect and smooth sailing. Significant breach, disappointing breach on that England game. But other times he does and has really tried to have everything in place. He hands out free masks to customers. And you'll see further ones in the bundle I put forward. There's letters from particular customers talking about their experiences. I'll just very sort of briefly, I know you will have read them, just touch on a few though. A Google review from April 2021, very well run, COVID rules being followed, bar staff excellent service. On page 7, a letter from Andrew Bonus, congratulating sort of the premises on, you know, doing their best with the COVID rules, found them very well run. Kept the tables spaced apart, 6 to a table. Obviously, that's times when it's rule of 6. Table service only, making sure face masks are worn, signs on display. And as a senior citizen, he says he felt safe when he was there. Colin Howe, being a disabled customer of the pub, they've had the one way in, one way out, and signing in, mask wearing, moving about, told to sit down and served at a table. Liam monitored who was coming in and out. I always felt safe. Maria Parkins, during the pandemic, had many safety measures in place to protect customers and staff, and her and her husband, you know, were grateful for that and allowed them to have a social life, you know, because they were in a high risk age bracket, sanitizers, tables cleaned. And a further one from a James Weir, observations of management control in a challenging time. It's his opinion that his staff did a good job applying the COVID rules. I witnessed on many occasions the challenging of these rules and restrictions by Liam and his team with sensitivity and professionalism. Credit to Liam and his team for an important enforcement of important rules. So I'd agree, important rules, absolutely. And he has not always met the standard he should have done. But on the whole, there are customers who have come forward and they don't have to do so and put in those letters just to confirm their experiences are, the rules are followed. And there has been exceptions to the rule, but it is not a sort of ongoing and habitual sort of breach of COVID rules. But for those that he has breached, that has absolutely put his hands up and is very apologetic for that. I know that from this morning discussing with Anne, she'd mentioned your public health officer had suggested a condition along the lines of making sure about the COVID risk assessment being in place. I don't have it in front of me. I'm sure Anne can clarify what that was, or Andy, but Mr. O'Connor is happy to agree to a condition like that being imposed on the licence, you know, the documented COVID risk assessment being available to the authorities, and whatever wording was suggested would be happy to do. And I think that's the public officer who put in a representation as well, to my knowledge. So I think she suggests that sort of condition would address her concerns. There's also been a number of instances of violence as well, which I'll address as I go through. So there's a few in the sort of last few months that have been flagged by the police. I can give you the comments, obviously, from Liam's point of view as to what these happens. Obviously, that they are serious incidents because they involve a level of violence where people have been hurt. So sometimes I'm just commenting on sort of his view of it. There's not necessarily like an excuse or anything along those lines. It's just sort of his perspective of what may have happened. The slightly most, the odd one of these ones is this glass throwing incident, because he was on shift that night. He does not know or was aware of that particular incident, and the barmaid who was on shift that night as well is not aware. And there is a statement in there where she says she was on shift from 4 till close, and no one had reported that to them, and it hadn't been witnessed. So it's difficult to say much more on that. I can't say it's not corroborated, I would say, but again, we can't deny it happened. It may have happened, and the person did not make themselves known to management or say that it did happen. Because I believe there's no ambulance or police attendance at the premises, but I believe the ambulance attended at the person's home, so that would make sense. But again, although there's no concrete evidence that it happened, I'm not necessarily disputing it happened. But again, for such matters, which is why it's important that good quality CCTV is in place throughout the premises, so that if the police flag this, that CCTV can be reviewed, images can be downloaded, and if events like this happen, images can be taken, bans can be handed out to customers that may have been seen to have been the offender, and obviously police can deal with it going forward in terms of images and taking appropriate action as well. The gentleman who had the head injury, as far as we understand, it's a domestic dispute between two people. It's not an important material factor, but it seems to be a coincidence they were in the pub at the same time. One had thought the other cheated with his now ex-wife, so it's like a sort of a Jeremy Kyle type of situation. An injured party approached the offenders and I think provoked them verbally, and it escalated very quickly. Escalated probably so quickly there wasn't a chance for staff intervention beforehand. But the police were sort of called, and Liam was getting the CCTV ready before the police even arrived. And I think I'll touch on it with the conflict management training condition that's been put forward. But again, for these sorts of things, that's why I think an appropriate condition is along the lines of staff or a duty manager always having the conflict management training. And quite frankly, it might be sensible for more staff to be put through conflict management as well, because part of that training will be the ability to maybe see or preempt a conflict brewing or arising where possible, and maybe nip it in the bud and intervene prior to it escalating, or if it is occurring, to assist in de-escalation of it, or if that is not possible, obviously to take appropriate action thereafter and what to do. So that's why conflict management training is quite a powerful one as well. The female with the shoulder injury, again, it's they were sat outside. We believe they were actually friends because they were sat on the same table, and they've had this, I think, an altercation about a boy, I think the paperwork says, as far as we're aware. And Liam did try to speak to the injured party after it happened, but neither her nor her friends would sort of discuss the matter with him. So he wasn't aware of the extent of the injury. You know, whether she was aware at that time, I don't know. She would have had a sore shoulder. It's possible someone could dislocate their shoulder and not be aware, but it wasn't made known to staff or managers or Liam at that time. So obviously it is a serious injury, but it wasn't presented to him, and they weren't sort of, you know, letting him know about the seriousness of it at that time. But again, the aggressor in that situation was barred, and it's important, again, CCTV will cover those external beer garden areas where it wasn't before covering it. So again, there's that level of deterrence and obviously crime detection as well. In terms of the football, there's two incidents that are raised to the football. The first relates to the semi-final, which is where people were hanging around after closing time. And obviously, on a scale of seriousness in terms of the information in front of you, I'd suggest this is more on the less serious scale. And it was people who wouldn't leave the car park. Liam was moving them on, and they refused. So Liam is the one that called the police to encourage them to move on, and they did throw some sort of, you know, alpha male type threats, you know, at the pub. I don't think those were made in seriousness from what Liam says, but that was a day of football at the pub that passed without incident. That was the only incident at the pub, and it happened just after closing time. But obviously, in terms of dispersal, again, you'll see, and I'll mention it, a door staff condition, that on certain days where the door staff are deployed, not only must they remain till closing, they'll have to remain until customers are dispersed from that vicinity. So in a similar situation, if customers not moving on, you'd also have door staff deployed to handle that. And obviously, if it's appropriate to call the police, they would be contacted as well. And then we have obviously the most, possibly the significant event which triggered really the summary review, which is obviously the actions of what happened at the England final. So I think it's fair to say that that is the triggering event. I'm sure PC Prescott would agree with that. And you have this combination of these sort of once in a lifetime events of a pandemic with social distancing combined with England being in a major tournament final. And Liam was considering and did undertake proactive steps, realizing it might be busier than usual. There hadn't been any trouble at previous England games, you know, certainly nothing of this nature. It wasn't any trouble, but appreciating it would be busier, he decided to put a guest list in place, which is something he had not done previously at other England games. And you'll see there's a Facebook post in the bundle just saying he'd confirmed it's guest list only, no walk-ins will be allowed. And he doesn't usually deploy door staff, but on this particular date, he also risk assessed the appropriateness of door staff and decided he would put 2 door staff on, and he also put on more bar staff than he would usually do, and also as well, you know, drinks wise, he didn't want to do shots, so he hadn't really been doing shots for the England games because he thought that would be a responsible thing to undertake, because obviously that could lead to maybe a high level of inebriation from customers. So he took shots off the menu for an England games and the final. So the issues started really when there were people on the guest lists, not on the guest lists, wanting to turn up and seek entry. And these aren't sort of the regular customers that would be at the premises, but obviously different people will come out of the woodwork in such events where there is like a large scale England game. And the triggering event was there was an adult inside, was ordering multiple drinks, standing next to people who looked younger. So the bar member was not happy. Of course, there was bar service, which there shouldn't have been in the first place. But the bar staff wouldn't serve him for fear of a proxy sale, so he was refused service. He came back some minutes later and tried it again and was refused service again. And at that point, the bar staff said to the doorman, "Can we move this person, please? He keeps trying to get served. We're worried about proxy sales." And that's the point of where the doorman was assaulted. So first aid was administered to him, and as soon as that was sort of dealt with, Liam did make the decision not to serve alcohol anymore that evening. So he took the decision. It could be out of control in terms of the numbers, because when the doorman was assaulted, obviously that's a distraction at the time. There was people outside the venue who weren't on the guest list, took that opportunity to come inside the venue, which is why it was even more crowded than it should have been. So after England scored the first goal, about that sort of timeline, a decision was made not to serve any more alcohol that night, and that stood for the remainder of the night. No more alcohol was sold after that point in time. So obviously the police attended in numbers, and obviously he wasn't ordered to close by the police, and there's a consideration about, is it appropriate to close on that night or not? And Liam took the decision that there is a merit to closing, but you also had sort of 100 people or so in the premises. England are 1-0 up. He stops alcohol service at the bar. He thought it would be the more responsible thing instead to take at that time, not to take those people out of the premises and put those people back onto the street. By that point in time as well, by the time the police had attended, another 2 door staff had come on. So actually the doorman in question had recovered, and actually, whether he should have done or not, finished his shift that day. So for the remainder of that night, there were 4 door staff on, and there weren't further issues for the rest of that evening. I just also wanted to make the point, I know PC Prescott didn't touch on it, but it is potentially in the paperwork as well. There isn't any evidence of firearms present in the premises. So there are sort of potential references about that, which of course would be concerning, but there is no evidence that there were firearms in the premises, either from witnesses or CCTV footage or anything along those lines. So clearly it was a very serious assault on the doorman. He was sort of knocked out sort of briefly. And it is very much acknowledged there are a number of violent incidents that have occurred over the last few months, which is why, no doubt, PC Prescott put forward very robust conditions to sort of address sort of the police's concerns going forward. And of course, it was necessary for those to be seriously reviewed, and obviously I assisted Liam in that process. There were only 4 conditions on the current licence, and if you are minded to accept the ones that have been sort of agreed with the police and looked over by your licensing officer as well, that will increase the number of conditions to 35 in total. So not only if the volume of conditions would significantly increase, many of them would be particularly robust conditions, and they are those conditions in pages 20 to 23 of the bundle. I tried to have a colour coding just to assist you in this, because obviously Appendix F of the original paperwork had the initial police conditions, so I wanted just to show you what the differences were. So those in grey are already on the licence, so that would be the case. If the licence is remaining in place, those would remain. Those without a colour are those put forward by PC Prescott, and those were accepted by Liam in full. So he had no sort of issues or pushback or any issues with those conditions. He accepted them, saw them, agreed with them. Those in green were ones where we discussed with the police, and I was instructed last week, so I had some sort of discussions almost on like a daily basis, and discussions about the conditions, and these are the ones now that Liam and West Midlands Police have agreed would be appropriate for going forward and promoting the licensing objectives. Discussions were about things such as achievability and timescales of coming into force. So on the whole, these conditions reflect a very, very robust list of conditions, which will hopefully, and I know members will have concerns, but will hopefully provide some comfort about, a way forward at this particular premises. I won't go on too much more, but I'll just take you through a couple of the conditions, by no means every single one. But conditions 1 to 3 are particularly prescriptive and robust. The first one is about staff members must receive initial training from a professional company. So the majority of premises would have just internal training instigated, but this commits staff having training from a professional company, and that will be refreshed every 6 months minimum. And that training is prescriptive. It includes certain mandatory criteria which they must have. So you could be satisfied going forward, staff would be very highly trained to a high level, sort of above and beyond what most premises would have. Condition 2 is that at all times there'll be a staff member present at the premises that has conflict management training. So I touched on that briefly, but again, that'd be far above and beyond what most premises would have. So I think it's likely that most staff would have the benefit of that training, but certainly there'll be sufficient staff to make sure there's a duty manager on staff at all times with that conflict management. And again, that's important if there are potential issues in the future about de-escalation and appropriate steps to take. So that is quite a robust condition as well. And the third one as well is a very, very robust condition, and you very rarely see it on licenses. But it's that a personal license holder will be on site at all times when trading. Now, the change we tweaked with West Midlands Police was to make that take effect from 6th of September, which is what PC Prescott agreed to. The reason for that was to just allow a little bit of time for Liam to get more staff on the APLH training course. That can be done remotely. He can be on with that, but then it will still take a few weeks to arrange criminal records checks and actually the personal license application. So it's felt just a little bit of grace period would assist with that particular condition. And obviously it's important that conditions, if they are imposed, must be capable of being met. So he would not want to be in a position, if you choose not to revoke or suspend the license, where he would have some sort of immediate condition breach he couldn't rectify easily, because obviously that would be problematic. And those three conditions do represent quite a substantial sort of legal commitment going forward from Liam. The CCV condition at condition 13 is a particularly robust one. It's probably one of the more robust ones I've seen in a while. I think we were happy to say Liam should be fully compliant with that condition as it currently stands in terms of his system upgrades. It does include internal and external coverage, and we believe that's to the satisfaction of West Midlands Police. I think that they've suggested so today. Again, that's a significant commitment that's already been achieved by the date of this particular hearing. Condition 15 is also a particularly robust one as well, and that's a door staff condition. And that's a commitment to deploying door staff on Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays from 6 p.m. And one of those, one door team member will have a body cam on them. So again, they will have a body cam on them. So not only will we have substantive CCTV throughout the internal and external premises, when door staff are deployed, one will have a body camera on them as well. Again, that's a particularly robust condition. And it also goes on to say about they will remain till closure, but also until people are dispersed from that immediate vicinity. So if there were groups hanging around, the door staff would have to remain and see those people safely dispersed. Again, I won't go through really the remainder of the conditions. If you have specific questions, I'm happy to address them. But if you compare them to the interim steps that were imposed, you will see the conditions put forward in agreement with West Midlands Police will generally reflect those interim steps, but with many more conditions on top of those as well. So as such, it is sort of the licence holder's submission that issues have occurred, issues of concern have occurred. There are issues for which he is to blame, and that, you know, service from the bar in the event of the England World Cup final should not have happened, and those COVID breach should not have happened. But his submit would be, it would not be appropriate or proportionate to impose a sort of a more severe outcome on the licence that was decided in the interim steps hearing in terms of a suspension or revocation. And obviously the review is one triggered by West Midlands Police. They are, of course, not the decision maker here today. The decision makers are yourselves, and it's for you to make that decision. But I would say positive discussions took place with West Midlands Police. They are your key advisor in matters of crime and disorder and crime and disorder prevention. And between ourselves and the police, these conditions are put forward for consideration. And I would hope PC Prescott would confirm that in their view, there are issues, but going forward, they feel that with that agreement, these conditions are robust and would answer those concerns going forward. So we would respectfully ask of yourselves that when you consider these matters, obviously, the committee will look to impose these very robust conditions as the appropriate way forward and proportionate way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Robson. Councillor Grinsell wishes to ask some questions at this moment in time to probably both yourself and to PC Luke Prescott.
Yes, you've obviously worked very hard on pulling these conditions together, and I applaud you for that. However, and one of the very last things that you said was that our partner, the West Midlands Police, are our people for crime and disorder. Let's bring COVID back into the equation here, because what we saw with the COVID breaches, which you admit to, they were breaking the law at that time. And so it's a time scale between the 26th of June and the 8th of July. Now, you mentioned serious incidents. Yeah, a hole in the head, a dislocated shoulder, slashing of a tyre. They're serious incidents. COVID, prior to this, killed in excess of 100,000 people in this country. I consider that a serious incident. And yet, the conditions do not cover COVID in any way, shape or form. I have seen the email from our environmental health officer where she has suggested that the duty holder should undertake a suitable and sufficient COVID risk assessment, etc. And yes, I certainly want to see that conditioned. I would like to ask the question of, obviously there were COVID breaches. Now, there were serious incidents where action is being taken by the police, investigations, potentially criminal acts. COVID breaches were a criminal act. Was or is anything being done to address those breaches and the breaking of the law at that point in time? Can you answer that first of all, and I may welcome back?
I guess that's directed towards myself. In terms of it, obviously, we've highlighted it to Public Health England. We're here today, and it's part of a sanction that you could pass down deemed against the business for the breaches of COVID. In terms of fines, individuals have not been given fines in relation to this breach of COVID. If we had the resources to issue 200 fines to some rowdy football fans on the night, then it would take a great deal to try and impose those kind of conditions. There's legislation in law in relation to COVID, and to translate that into licensing conditions can be quite difficult. I think it's an untested area at the moment, but we're willing to experiment and see if we can come up with some solution and work with our partner agencies such as Public Health England, who are the lead in terms of prosecutions and enforcing it.
Well, I would say that I tend to disagree with you slightly, because we have had incidents here on this licensing committee where we have imposed actions because of breaches of COVID. And I equate COVID to a much more serious state of affairs than the incidents, the serious incidents that were we've obviously got in front of us. So certainly I would want to see, you have worked hard, I accept, but it doesn't cover COVID. We have to have included the clause, a condition in respect to undertake suitable and sufficient COVID risk assessments. I want to, you mentioned, and I think I hope it was a throwaway remark, a mea culpa. It was sort of, we're sorry, and this pandemic has been horrendous for the whole of the UK. A mea culpa? I'd like your comments on it, frankly.
Well, that's maybe a poor choice of words on my part, so I would hope that wouldn't reflect on Liam. So it was not meant to in any way undermine seriousness. You have my apologies if it came across that way. We've of course all been affected one way or the other, either directly or people we know by the pandemic, and I hope after that poor comment make it quite clear Liam is very much sorry or that night, and it should not have happened. And if you want to hear from, I think to hear from Liam directly as well about that, it might be useful.
Yeah, definitely. COVID rules are definitely like, in a sense, like the key. Like, I mean, apart from on obviously the football night, like I have been very strict and everything on the rules of COVID in the pub, only simply because a lot of my customers are the older generation and stuff like that. So I wouldn't be able to live with myself if something did happen to them and what, because obviously for one, obviously it's my customer base for one, but for two, obviously I care for them. I've known them for over 11 years. These people, it's like my family in the pub. So I wouldn't want to do something to put them in risk, in a sense.
The points that has been put over by Councillor Grinsell are very important. I just wonder why, if you couldn't, PC Prescott, naturally dish out dozens and dozens of tickets to people in the pub who are attending there and breaking the rules. But why wasn't the DPS fined or given a ticket for non-compliance with the rules? I mean, Councillor Grinsell is quite right, but hopefully COVID will be never occurring again, but we don't know. There's no harm of having it into the conditions that have been put forward. However, this was in the past, and hopefully we won't see COVID in the future. But really and truly, I think there was, in my opinion anyway, the landlord should have been taken to task over this and probably dealt with, as we dealt with other public houses in the borough of Solihull in the previous months.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with you. The decision-making process on the night of the officers that attended is for them to, you know, make their decision and live with it. What I've done is I've provided you with evidence of officers that have attended so that we can deal with it. In my opinion, if Liam was the DPS on the night in question, I'd be here asking for a removal of him, but he wasn't the DPS at any of these incidents that I've reported to you. The place was running without a DPS at the time, in my opinion.
This is a privately, as I understand, it's a privately run pub. It isn't belonging to a brewery of any sort. So therefore, I'm correct on that.
It is a brewery run pub. Yes. I have a lease on the pub, but it is brewery run.
So do you have what I would call an area manager visiting you?
Yes.
So I was under the impression you probably didn't. So this really makes me even more concerned that if there is an area manager coming from the particular company, in my experience with area managers, if things aren't working properly, he deals with it and gets you to make damn sure that you actually carry those rules and regulations out.
Yeah.
So in actual fact, looking at all these cases of assault on clients, on the police vehicle, is very, very serious indeed. And I think it is so serious that the management of this particular public house, the Toby Jug, has failed to adhere to what I consider to be rules and regulations to ensure that you continue to run your pub in a much better form and management. How can I be assured that these conditions here will be adhered to? Who's going to check them out?
Well, I myself will be definitely making sure that they will be checked out. I have regular visits, even more regular visits now with my area manager and what. But I would like to state that, to be fair, we didn't have no problems up until these incidents and what, and they did all just come in a short space of time. and what, and then other than that, beforehand, and what, there was no problem whatsoever in the pub. Like, there was no violence, there was no crime or anything like that, dating back for a long time, to be fair.
How would you feel on the suggestion that I made an hour ago nearly, that we reduce the hours temporarily to see how you actually adhere to the rules that we've got before us? Say 10:30 instead of midnight every day. Would that be something that you would be happy to work with for the next 4 months?
Yeah, most definitely. To be fair, I have been closing early every night, pretty much most nights during COVID. Anyway, but I completely agree with that there, and would do it definitely for a 4-month period.
Chair, if I might just say, you are absolutely right to do that, just on a legal point as well for your legal advisor. I think the law allows it for a 3-month period maximum. Just, I know you mentioned a 4-month period, but if you were considering that, I think it's a 3-month period is a potential.
Whether it's 3 months or 4 months, in my opinion, if it's 3 months, I'd be happy to go on that, because we would then see how the CCTV system has been working, whether the police have been called out on a number of occasions, or whether it's then a pub that anyone would have pleasure in attending. At the moment, I wouldn't see dead there, to be perfectly honest. And quite honestly, if you're prepared to have that 3 months down to 10:30, you will then be coming towards the Christmas period. And therefore, if everything is in good order, I would be happy to see those hours go back. But it's up to yourself to make sure that they do work.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and well, I'm happy to have that on the condition.
No, I think everything has been covered in relation to it. We've explored the conditions going forward. And so long as that training is instigated at the earliest opportunity, not only for Liam, but for all of his staff, it'll give them the best chance of going forward and succeeding.
Any further questions that you would like to ask of the police, Patrick?
No, thank you, Chair.
No. Are there any further questions from yourself? No. Any officers' comments? Do you, Luke, agree with the 10:30 for the next 3 months?
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
Good, good. How, asking the question to Anne probably, or to Mr. Cunningham, how, once the 3 months is up, that would be sometime in late November, who would then say everything's okay, you can revert back to the midnight, I think it is? Or would we have to reconvene this panel?
No. Oh, go on.
Chairman, you just put that as a condition to remain in force for the date of 3 months. Thereafter, we'll revert back to the normal midnight hours.
Just for good order, because you've accepted the potential of that condition being imposed, can you also confirm that you'd be happy for the condition in respect to the COVID assessments?
Yeah, that was agreed.
Thank you.
Chairman, if it would help you, I can tell you that we can work with the premises licence holder to ensure that the conditions are put into place and complied with, as we have done with previous establishments in the last 12, 18 months.
That's good to hear. But of course, this public house, the Toby Jug, has created an awful lot of problems for both your department and of the police, a lot of time, a lot of professional time, and we don't want to see it being repeated. And for us to be back here again. So it's important that we adhere. If there are no
Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you for coming back. We as a panel have been highly disturbed at the situation that occurred at the Toby Jug over a number of months. We feel that it's not been as well run as it should have been, and we're pleased to see some of the conditions that are there. We even discussed suspension of the licence. We've also concerned about, as I mentioned earlier, the cost to public resources with regard to the police and the council as well, with regard to the licensing department. However, we have, as a panel, carefully read the papers in the report and heard all the verbal representations. There has obviously been very serious COVID and violent incidents. The panel were pleased that all parties have been working on a very robust conditions to promote the licensing objectives going forward. The panel have also considered them in detail and have added the following conditions. Firstly, A, that the hours of licensable activities be restricted to 10:30 p.m. each day until the 12th of November 2021. And B, the DPS shall undertake a suitable and sufficient COVID risk assessment covering risks to staff and all visitors. This risk assessment to be immediately available to police and licensing officers upon request. On this occasion, we've decided that it is appropriate and proportionate to impose the above conditions as well as the conditions agreed with the police. Finally, I sincerely hope that we don't hear any more problems coming from the Toby Jug. And if there are, I am sure we will take an even stronger line than we've already taken. The future is in your hands, Leon, and your staff. It must be a very difficult pub to run with some of the clientele that attend there, but you've also got what I would call senior citizens and responsible people attending. And those are the sort of clients that you need to continue to encourage to attend your establishment. So, no black cap today, but quite honestly, improvement is 100%. And please adhere to all these regulations because we will take a much stronger line in the future if this occurs. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors.
Chair, could I just clarify the third point there about the conditions agreed with the police? Is that the modified version that came from Patrick? Yes, thank you.